Babcock State Park is almost all woods.
It was really kind of a spooky place.
When we arrived at cabin 13, it appeared that there was a real serious struggle going on there.
Somebody killed her. I just could not fathom that someone had actually killed her.
To look back and see all these clues that I missed, that I just didn't see.
There was a male subject in the photos that appeared to be in various stages of undress.
His story didn't add up.
That night wasn't a lot of traffic out, nothing going on. So I decided to go have dinner. As soon as I walked in, I got the radio call. There was a individual that called in from Babcock State Park. He said several individuals had broken into his cabin and attacked him and his wife. So I was on my way. When I arrived on scene, there was the headquarters building, and that's where the call came from. He was there at the telephone, and the only thing he had on was a pair of brief white underwear. His legs were scratched.
I called for help. Please don't hurt me, please.
As I approached him, he was very hysterical.
I need help.
I said, calm down. I'm a police officer. I'm here to help you, not hurt you. Asked him if he knew who he was. He told me he was Mr. Flippo. He advised me at that time that his wife was still at the cabin. I asked him, which cabin were you at? He said, cabin number 13. So I told him to go with me. I placed him in my cruiser. I asked him what had happened. He had told me that several people had been there. They had attacked him and his wife. The distance between the headquarters building and cabin 13 is probably about 7/10 of a mile down a one-lane road. When we arrived at cabin 13, there was a Camaro sitting on the left-hand side of the road across from the cabin. Had looked like a white T-shirt or something hanging off the side view mirror. I said, did you arrive in this car? He said, no, I don't know who owns that car. I said, do you remember how you got here? He gave me very good details of his green Cadillac. There was no green Cadillac anywhere around. I told him to remain seated in the vehicle, and I was going to check the cabin. It had been raining that night, so it was kind of slippery. I didn't know what I was walking in on. I thought there were several people inside the cabin. I thought there was going to be a fight.
Hello?
I yelled in the Fayette County Sheriff's Office. Is anyone in there? There's no response. I looked over at the bed. There was a large blood stain on the bed. And I seen a lady laying between the bed and the wall. A lot of blood. At that point, I walked back out. Went back to my cruiser, got on the radio, and called for other assistance. And an ambulance. I'm trying to keep Mr. Flippo calm until I can get medical attention for him. Once the ambulance got there, one attendant took care of Mr. Flippo, and me and the other ambulance attendant went over and checked his wife.
Michael Flippo's wife, Cheryl Flippo, was deceased.
You never think anything like this will happen. She was a beautiful person, and she brought joy to many people and to us. We grew up in southern West Virginia. There was 7 of us children.
We lived in a little coal mining community that had like 22 houses. We went to church about every Sunday.
Cheryl, as far back as I can remember, she always was very devoutly religious.
When we reached high school, you know, thinking about your future and what you want to be, and she prayed for the Lord's direction, and she felt the Lord told her she should be a minister's wife. Michael was in college studying to go into the ministry. So when Cheryl and Mike were introduced, Cheryl was very interested because she felt the Lord works in wonderful ways. When Cheryl and Mike got married, Cheryl was 19 and Michael was a few years older.
She glowed. She was so happy.
Cheryl and Mike had been living in Nitro, West Virginia, for about 15 years.
The kings of the armies, they flee.
Michael Flippo was a pastor at a Church of God in Nitro.
He was a typical Church of God minister. He spoke in tongues. He did his altar calls.
Gain the command. Great is the tidings of those. More than faith.
Cheryl absolutely took her role as a pastor's wife extremely seriously. She felt that they were like a couple in their ministry as well as a couple in their marriage. She was constantly doing things for the church, for people in the church.
She had lots of roles in the church. She was part of the women's group. She was youth leader, Sunday school teacher. I mean, she did all different kinds of roles that Michael needed her to fill. And Cheryl loved those things.
They was always busy going to church, going to hospitals and going to people's houses.
Michael said that they were just riding around, and on the spur of the moment, they decided that they would like to spend the night at Babcock, where they could have a romantic evening.
Michael Flippo rented cabin 13 in Babcock State Park.
Babcock State Park is almost all woods. I think many people would go to Babcock for seclusion.
They have hiking trails and cabins that are built along the creek that runs through there.
It's very quiet. Normally, not a whole lot goes on at nighttime.
When I first got there, I met up with Sergeant Bryant, and he gave me a brief rundown of meeting Flippo.
The police had to tell him that his wife was dead. He was sad and grieving, but they still had to ask him questions as they were moving forward with the investigation.
Michael Flippo was confused, incoherent at times. The statement that he gave was they had a pleasant evening, eating ice cream and eating snacks. Then they retired for the evening. He stated that this intruder had broke into the cabin while he and Cheryl were sleeping and attacked them both. In her final moments of life, how much fear she must have suffered at that point. Michael Flippo told us this intruder just hit him in the middle of the night. And while he was knocked down on the floor, the intruder got on his legs to hold him down, facing him, and took a knife, cutting his legs.
He was unconscious for a period of time. Then when he came to, he went over, he checked his wife.
He says he put his head down on his wife's chest and he could hear her heartbeat.
He had told me he couldn't find a cell phone. So he ran out the door and he ran to use the payphone at headquarters. It was obvious what had happened to her. What wasn't obvious was who did it. And that is the thing that we have to find out. I left Garland with the house, let him process it. Early morning hours next morning. The area was searched.
Babcock State Park is huge. Most of the park is wooded. The police start looking for that someone to check to see if he was out there.
I placed an officer up at the mouth of the road, so if anybody left the area, we'd know about it. Every camp was checked. We went to the cabin, talked to the individual that was there, asked them if they heard anything. Told them to stay inside the cabin until somebody says it's okay to come out.
No one who was near cabin 13 heard or saw anything.
We were trying to collect evidence as quickly as possible. I obtained the license plate and had a registration check for the Camaro. Now we wanted to start processing the crime scene before we did anything. There was a table with various items on it. Cheryl's purse was there. The briefcase was there. There was a bloody fingerprint that was discovered in the bathroom window on the inside roll of the duct tape. It appeared that there was a real serious struggle going on there. You could see the blood splatter on the wall. Various items turned over. The bedding had been pulled down to the foot of the bed.
As Garlandberg processed the whole scene, he did find a piece of wood that he believed was the murder weapon.
Cheryl Flippo had taken a severe beating. To think that someone could mutilate a human body like that, it's hard to forget.
I drove up to my mom's because my kids were staying there. And when I opened the door, I heard Pamela screaming.
Cheryl's son had called and said that Cheryl was dead, that she had been murdered. And I was like, shocked. Cheryl's dead. And Michael is in the hospital.
I just remember saying, somebody killed her. Somebody killed her. Really? Somebody killed her? I just could not fathom it, that someone had actually killed her.
My immediate reaction was to think that this had to be a mistake. Who would do that to Cheryl? I would have thought she would have been the last person that anyone would want to hurt, period.
Flippo was being treated at the hospital. There was a small wound to his forehead, and he got struck in the back of the head and some cuts on his leg. Very, very minor. So he got released from the hospital. He was transported to the sheriff's department where they performed a more in-depth interview. When he was questioned about who could do this to you, Michael Flippo appeared scared. He said someone was communicating threats to him.
He said, somebody's stalking me. The stalker was in and out of their lives, and now he was back.
Many years before Cheryl's murder, Michael Flippo had made several reports concerning this alleged stalker.
Cheryl called to tell us that they thought somebody was following Michael and had threatened him.
We all knew that there was somebody doing some strange things around their house.
The stalker was even entering his house and leaving notes taped in various locations.
The notes were made from cutting letters out of magazines and gluing them on paper.
Cheryl would come home and find a note someplace. And it would say, you know, I'm watching you, I'm after you, I'm gonna get you, stuff like that.
The notes were very brief, but they indicated that someone was trying to hurt them.
The idea that the stalker could come into their home and do that and disappear, that was very scary.
I do remember telling Cheryl, you guys should not be alone. It seems like when you're alone, that's when you're more at risk. Cheryl did at one point tell her friend, I believe somebody's trying to kill me.
We also learned about an incident at the church in Nitro.
Michael had been in the church.
And right after he left, the church caught fire.
The thought was the stalker was in there, and the stalker was the one that set the fire.
They were very scared. Cheryl didn't feel safe.
The FBI got involved, and the house was staked out.
The Nitro police took this very seriously, and I know that they were at that home and the church on several occasions. Michael began to tell his church family, Cheryl, and the Nitro police that he was once again being stalked. He reported to the police that among the many things that would indicate the stalker was there was this note that said, April showers, bring May flowers to your grave.
Most of the congregation had a plan to protect them. Men from the church would come in and stay with Michael and Cheryl to make sure that nothing happened.
Michael said the stalker left a message on the answering machine saying, I tried to kill you 8 years ago and failed, but I won't this time.
He was the one that went into that cabin to commit this heinous crime. We had been at the cabin all day. It took so long to process the crime scene. We wanted to preserve and to collect evidence slowly, meticulously. There was a briefcase laying on the table. There was some papers in there that had Michael Flippo's name and address on there. There was an envelope that appeared to have photos in it. There was a male subject in the photos that appeared to be in various stages of undress. The man was standing by a car, taking off his pants.
The police have no idea who this man is in those pictures, and no idea of his relationship to the Flippos.
We went to Nitro to talk to the members of the church. The members of the congregation were very leery about talking to law enforcement.
They loved their pastor, they loved their pastor's wife. The people of the church felt loyal to the Flippos.
We actually rented a motel to interview the ones that would cooperate, but would only come in the early morning hours of darkness so that they could keep from being seen. When we interviewed some of the congregants, we determined the person in the photograph was an individual by the name of Joel. Joel was a friend of Michael Flippo's. He was a young adult. I believe he was 25 years old.
I knew a little about Joel. Michael was trying to counsel him and provide spiritual guidance.
Michael started hanging out with Joel quite a bit.
He had been trying to work out some kind of land deal with Joel, and they were going to go into some kind of business together. Cheryl was very anxious. She just seemed stressed. She had her reservations about it.
I don't think she ever really trusted Joel.
One particular couple informed us about the close relationship that Joel and Michael Flippo had developed. They said that strange things were happening in church, and that Joel had even started occupying the seat that Cheryl Flippo normally occupied in the church.
That made her uncomfortable. She didn't understand that. Michael was gone a lot, and she seemed extra nervous about why he was gone.
We learned through the investigation that Michael Flippo and Joel had went to a ski resort. They were together for the weekend and spent the night together in one room.
I'm sure a lot of Michael's behavior disturbed her, and I'm sure her gut was telling her things weren't right.
When the stalker thing got really bad, she also told me that Joel was staying in their house. I said, Cheryl, why would Joel be staying in your house? I know you have some concerns about him. And she said Michael brought him into the house because he was an expert with a gun. So that would offer them some protection if somebody tried to harm them.
They found Michael Flippo's diaries on the computer at Flippo's church. Several years earlier, a member of the congregation had installed the computer at the church. And Flippo asked him to include a journal program so the congregant knew the diary existed, and he went to find it. Flippo talks about men and his frustrations about his sexuality.
In his diary, he says, I love Joel. He also says, I'm not a homosexual, but I feel like I would like to have a man put his arms around me. And for us, that was pretty shocking.
We were like, what? Just mind-boggling. What? We thought we knew Michael.
The member of the church was pretty disturbed when he read it, and he gave it to the investigators.
It kind of seems like he was living the double life.
So we wanted to get as much information about the marriage as possible. Inside Cheryl's Bible, which was located inside the cabin, was a letter that had been written to Michael Flippo.
In Cheryl's letter, she was clearly expressing frustration. She said something like, "I'm so tired of going to bed punished." She said, "I do love you, but I hate this competition that you've created." And one of the things he said in the letters, too, is, "Why can't I have a friend?" His idea that he would have to have this friendship in secret didn't sit well with him at all. It's clear from her letters, she wanted him to put her above Joel, but she didn't feel like that's what Michael was doing.
And then the results of the registration check made on the license plate for the Camaro came back registered to Joel.
It was becoming pretty clear that the police had serious questions about the relationship between the two men. So they called Joel to come and speak to them. Joel denied that he had any involvement with the murder. He clearly stated it was his car, but he was not there. And he said that Flippo was threatened by a stalker and wanted to get away. So he volunteered to give his red Camaro to the couple. Joel did say to the police that on April 27th, just a few days before the murder, he and Flippo visited Babcock State Park and just drove around. He's the one that told Flippo, "Get cabin 13." He had been to that park many times since he was a kid. He liked the park very much. Joel had always wanted to be baptized at this park. So they found a spot where they could pull over and do this baptism. Joel explained that those photos record the time after the baptism, changing from wet clothes into dry clothes, and that Flippo took the pictures to capture a happy moment. Joel said he and Michael Flippo were absolutely just friends. And when he was asked about the marriage, he thought that Flippo and his wife had a good marriage. The police were trying to figure out, was it Joel? Is he telling the truth?
When he was questioned again, Flippo said that he had borrowed Joel's car to be in somewhat of a disguise so that the stalker couldn't follow them.
Every time that police asked Michael Flippo who the murderer would have been, he continued to say it was the stalker.
He could never describe the stalker. He can't give a physical description.
We were beginning to be suspicious of what had happened. So we wanted to see the cabin.
It was really kind of a spooky place. Just eerie and so isolated.
I felt Cheryl. I felt Cheryl's presence. I remember sitting down at a table that was there, and I could feel her just wash over me.
Just was one of the worst feelings you could ever get. Walking in there and knowing that that's the last thing that she ever saw was the inside of that cabin. It was brutal.
Now we wanted to go back and look at the photographs in case we missed something with the naked eye. At first impression, the attack occurred in the bed. But when I looked at the blood pool on the floor, you could see where something had been dragged through the blood.
It seemed like someone picked up a pillow, sopped it up with the blood on the floor, and put it on the bed. Someone was trying to make it look like Mrs. Flippo died in the bed instead of on the floor.
When you're looking at the rocking chair turned over, it would give the impression that there was a struggle. You start looking closely, there was clothing neatly stacked underneath the rocking chair. Then I noticed that footprints were very evident at the cabin.
It was extremely rainy that night. If you got off the walkway at all, you got mud on your feet.
You could see Charlie Bryant's footprints and the footprints of the medic that was going in. So you're looking then and you're thinking, where is this third person? In my opinion, Michael Flippo couldn't describe this stalker because there was no stalker involved. This was a staged crime scene. It started becoming evident at that point that Michael Flippo was no longer a victim, but he was a suspect.
When Officer Burke looked back at the church fire several years earlier, he learned the fire chief suspected it was arson from the beginning.
I think he learned that you can get money from insurance.
They kept saying they needed a new church. They needed a new church. And that old church burnt down and they got a brand new church.
I mean, it's too coincidental. Burn, 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 burn.
Our investigation also revealed a background of embezzling money.
Just before the murder, there was a child who desperately needed a liver and pancreas transplant. Everybody rallied around this family, and ultimately they raised almost $90,000. Flippo opened an account for the child with only his name on it, and he was dipping into that account. There was around $12,000 missing. Flippo took that money and he was never held to account.
He always liked expensive things, always liked to impress people. It'd always been about money.
Cheryl was determined that they would live with a budget and save money for their retirement, which was not Michael's plan.
We discovered a life insurance policy had been taken out.
He had made this life insurance policy, making himself the sole beneficiary. And if Cheryl would die, he would get $100,000.
The insurance policy was taken out in the name of Cheryl Flippo on March 1st. And it went into effect April 1st. The pieces of the puzzle started coming together.
His story didn't add up. He did this.
We actually got a search warrant to have his body examined. So we took Michael Flippo to the medical examiner. He checked the wounds and the way the striations were on his leg. They were self-inflicted in this case. The curve of the wound is one of the things you look at. And from observing the wounds on his leg, we could determine the wounds were self-inflicted. And then the results from the bloody thumbprint on the duct tape came back matched to Michael Flippo.
By that point, investigators believed they had a complete picture of what led to her murder. On April 27th, after Joel and Michael visited Babcock State Park, Flippo reserved cabin 13.
He brought her to cabin 13 because it was a secluded area.
You could do about anything, and nobody had known about it.
What I think occurred was that Cheryl and Michael had laid down in her mind to go to sleep and have a restful evening. And Michael started striking her with the piece of firewood.
I can't imagine what went through her head at that point. It's the worst kind of betrayal.
The scene was made to look like the stalker came in and had a big struggle with Michael Flippo and harmed him.
He fled the scene. He made his cover story that removed him from any guilt.
The day before Cheryl Flippo's funeral, we went to Nitro and arrested Flippo. That was a very satisfying moment to me.
Michael Flippo was charged with the first-degree murder of his wife.
You fought for justice for her. You wouldn't have been able to live without justice for her. But it didn't make the pain go away.
We never got a confession. We never heard anything other than the fabrication he told us up front.
We did debate whether or not anybody else was involved.
But when we sat and listened to Garland Burke tell us that he was at that cabin for 5, 6, 7 days, he could not find a molecule or a hair sample or a blood spatter or anything that did not belong to those two people.
The only piece of evidence that even connected Joel was the use of his car that Michael Flippo had driven to Babcock.
I thought I was good in judging people. And to look back and see all these clues that I missed, that I just didn't see. There wasn't a stalker.
Michael was the stalker.
Every time Michael would get into trouble, he would say the stalker was after him.
It was like his ace in the hole, you might say.
For a preacher, I think he was very devious.
He betrayed all those people, not just us and her and his family. He betrayed all those people that he supposedly was ministering to. In my mind, you know, it's like she paid the price for his sins. And how is that right?
Cheryl was our angel on earth. She wasn't perfect, but that she was our angel on earth. She was the heart of our family. So to lose that for us was insurmountable. I feel the pain as much today as I did in 1996.
We had to move on. We did our own things. It was extremely hard to do it without her. It was for me. Life goes on for us. It will never be the same, but at least you have the solace of knowing that he'll never be able to do it to anyone else.
We had a cabin on Stump Island. I'm not saying that evil things were happening, but it was a creepy space.
There were rumors galore.
They were concerned that you have a serial killer in your community.
That cabin holds an awful lot of secrets.
Deep in the heart of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a storm of startling secrets and terrible truths shock a close-knit community and fracture a family. With murder.
I still get emotional recounting this whole saga.
A lot of people were visibly upset and crying about what had happened.
There had been a lot going on behind the scenes for months that no one was really aware of.
The hidden secrets and deadly deceptions hide unthinkable crimes.
It was right under our noses and we didn't even know.
Lies untangled, tragically released.
It was shocking.
Nobody knew what had happened.
Who did it?
We don't know who this person is.
It's scary.
And why?
There was a lot of twists and turns to this case.
But nobody knows the real, twisted, sick, dark truth.
A secret to die for. In southern United States, on the banks of the Mississippi River, is the culturally rich city of Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Baton Rouge it's a great city. It's the capital of our state of Louisiana. There's lots of culture.
The reason people love it here is the food, the people.
It's a great place to live.
This exciting, eclectic locale attracts many people, including Scott Rogers.
Scott Rogers was a very flamboyant and charismatic person. Everybody loved his personality.
He was a charismatic type of person.
Scott was drawn to the rich culture of Baton Rouge for new and bigger opportunities, leaving his UK life behind.
In Bury St. Edmunds, England, Scott Rogers had started a performing arts academy with his former wife. He taught dance, they taught acting lessons, public speaking.
And I think at one point they had almost 800 children enrolled.
Scott loves his new home in the US, and it isn't long before his daughter, Kimmy, and two members of his extended family, Matthew and Stuart, join him in Baton Rouge.
From all appearances, Scott and the family seemed to be doing very well. He bought a large house just south of Baton Rouge.
And it was a beautiful home.
And then after a period of time, Scott decided to adopt a little boy.
The adoption process is pretty straightforward. Fill out the paperwork and give a needy child a loving family.
And they were all living together in Scott Rogers' home.
And it was certainly large enough for all of the people that they had living under that roof. And Scott Rogers appeared to be the happiest person on earth.
But Scott and his family are harbouring shocking secrets and lies that are festering just below the surface.
It was right under our noses and we didn't even know the truth.
As Scott and his family embrace their new life in Baton Rouge, it isn't long before Scott begins making a name for himself around town.
Scott Rogers was very liked in the Baton Rouge area and the community. He was very involved in the church. He would help with charity events and anywhere and everywhere he could. People loved him.
To make money and help local charities, Scott starts a video production company and everyone chips in.
It was a family-run business.
Matthew and Stuart, as well as Kimmy, were all involved in his production company.
Scott and his family produce promotional videos for several non-profits and charities in Baton Rouge. But the ambitious business owner has a secret desire.
He wanted to get in front of that camera.
After Scott was in Baton Rouge for a period of time, he started producing a television show.
He did a local TV show called Around Town on Saturday mornings.
The Around Town show continues now with all the good and positive in our community.
Scott had his family helping him. Stuart did pretty much most of the filming. Matthew ran the business.
And his daughter Kimmy works as Scott's assistant and receptionist.
He liked to bring people on to do a cooking segment. He had segments on there where people performed.
And over time, he built up an audience for the show itself, and he became more of a public figure within the community by jumping off of that show.
He was such an upbeat person, and people around Baton Rouge and surrounding areas, they loved him.
He was funny. In the day and age we live in, it's nice to just lay low and let the stress go and just laugh and smile. It just felt lighthearted that I wanted to keep watching.
Their studio was actually located in an old shopping mall here in the city. The cameras were top-notch, the latest technology. The lighting was professional. The sets were professional. Everything about it was first-rate.
That's when he really started getting a following.
And his show begins to attract more high-profile guests.
Scott was very, very good at bringing guests onto the show who had some sort of level of influence. Law enforcement executives from various agencies, public officials, congressmen, governor, the district attorney, and he would let them come onto his show and plug whatever they wanted to talk about.
Congressman, it's always a pleasure and an honor to have you on our show.
Hey, Scott, it is great to be here.
So at this point, Scott has become somewhat of a known entity in the community. He's something of a celebrity. He's on television every week. He's showing up at different events.
Not sure if you caught the Dunham Jazz Ensemble around the corner as you came in. Amazing, talented group.
People did look at him as a local celebrity in Baton Rouge.
Scott finds a way to expand his audience even further and help his community.
He got invited to preach a sermon at a non-denominational church here in Baton Rouge. He looked around and saw this congregation that received him very well, and he thought, I can do this.
Scott loves the thrill and respect of preaching and decides to follow his newfound calling.
He got ordained online, and then he opened his own church.
Now, Scott Rogers, a man around town and local TV celebrity, is also Pastor Scott.
And first service, I'm told he had 50 to 60 people show up at his church.
He had the gift of gab, naturally, because to start a TV show and obviously start a church, you have to be able to speak to people.
He's also now becoming a religious leader.
It's at this point when Scott would bring in someone that will become an integral part of his professional and personal life.
Maria Edwards was co-pastor of the church with Scott, and she helped bring other people into the church and put together the sermons and the program that the congregation would see each week.
She and Scott had an extremely close relationship. She was in charge of financials for the church. Basically, she was in charge of everything.
Maria Edwards was frequently at Scott's home on weekends. They had big family meals. They got together for holidays together. She was very much part of the family.
But how well does Scott really know his new friend and business confidant?
There are just certain types of people that you're suspicious of.
A lot of people do have secrets. What you see is not always the way somebody really is.
Scott's facing a similar issue. His increased public presence is beginning to raise eyebrows.
I just thought, there's more to this guy. I thought that his persona as he presented it was just completely false. But a lot of people did not share that opinion.
Scott Rogers has built a powerful public life for himself and for his family. But disturbing questions and painful secrets will tear it all apart.
There's a deep, dark secret that is about to come to light.
Scott Rogers has built a good life in Baton Rouge. With his family, he runs a successful TV production company and a local church.
He's something of a celebrity, and he's very involved in the community.
Scott is also a foster parent and eventually decides he wants to expand his family even further.
He decided he wanted to adopt a second little boy. And he went on his TV show saying, I'm adopting a second child, and as soon as the adoption's final, I'll have him on the program so you can all meet him.
Scott fills out the boy's adoption papers, and it's not long before he welcomes him into the family.
He was recognized by the Department of Children and Family Services for fostering children in his home.
To the public, he was a good person. People looked up to him. He was highlighting the good in the community. He was bringing to light the nonprofits, giving to the charities. He's a perfect parent.
He presented himself in a way that was very positive and civic-minded, and over time, he had built up quite a network of people, both personally and professionally, who thought very highly of him.
Many of them are invited to appear on Scott's TV show to discuss important social issues.
Wherever there was a powerful politician or somebody who held a powerful office, he was right there.
He invited elected officials, from the governor to statewide elected officials to the mayors. I mean, anybody in any prominent role in the community that he could get on the show, he brought in. He just fawned all over them.
Which he did shamelessly. He showered people with praise and sat there and told them how wonderful they were and stroked their egos on this show. And then what he did with all of these networks he formed is that he created this aura of legitimacy and respectability.
Scott begins to utilize these new, powerful political connections for his own financial benefits.
He tried to really expand by getting contracts with politicians to do their political campaigns or whatnot, any video services that they needed.
Scott's plan works. He's approached to co-produce a series of public education videos for Homeland Security on how to prepare for natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina. The contract will be shared between Scott and a local company owned by Rana Gray.
Rana is a fairly well-known person in this community in political circles. She has a background in public relations and politics and campaign management.
My business partner and I had a small public relations firm in Baton Rouge. The director of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness asked me if we'd be comfortable working with him, and my business partner and I said sure. So we ended up working on this project with Scott Rogers' company.
But afterwards, their relationship becomes soured when Scott reveals a more unscrupulous side.
Our client discovered that he was taking the same content and reselling it to the state emergency operations center. So this content was basically being paid for twice.
Even more brazen and personal, Scott keeps the final $15,000 payment owing to Rana's PR firm that he collected.
He was refusing to hand over our fees. He was keeping them.
He pretty much scooped it all from beneath her by getting all the money, then refusing to give her her part of the money.
It was just very upsetting.
And this is where it gets ugly and public.
It resulted in a lawsuit being filed over non-payment of monies.
He was so mad that he was able to get the local newspaper to write a story where he claimed that he was forced to work with me and just saying lies about us. I mean, to me, it was slander. I was so angry about this because your entire livelihood and profession depends on you maintaining a reputation.
To defend herself and her company's reputation, Rana fights back.
I wrote a letter to the editor to try to correct it and set the record straight.
It was really the only recourse she had.
The newspaper publishes Rana's rebuttal. But her letter calling out and naming Scott Rogers does little to tarnish his squeaky clean image.
He was important, and he had a lot of important friends.
Why would anybody question somebody who was a pastor in a church?
But he had a dark side that no one here knew.
The shiny veneer of Scott Rogers' public persona seemed to be chipping away for some, but for Scott, building pressure and secrets only intensifies his resolve.
I had no idea the lengths he was going to try to destroy our firm. He was calling people at night, urging them to not work with us.
Yes, I understand.
This is not the Scott Rogers from television.
It was just another part of the psychology of Scott Rogers. It was just part of the craziness.
But little does Rana know, her letter will set off a chain of events that will expose startling secrets. One day, when Scott Rogers is away from home, a life-changing disruption to his illustrious life comes crashing down on him in a very personal and devastating way.
Scott Rogers had custody of 2 foster kids, and Child Services removed them from Scott's home.
The kids were taken away from him, and Scott was very distraught, and he felt like his world was crumbling.
What is going on, and what deception, lies, and hidden truths are threatening to be revealed?
You think that this is a great person, but behind those closed doors is a very dark secret.
And it may only just be the beginning. Popular TV host and church leader Scott Rogers is devastated after his 2 foster children are removed from his home.
Child Services said he had improperly filled out his paperwork. That's what led to Child Services taking the kids.
You know, I'm sure there were many questions and many untruths told on his application to even get these kids. And so once all that is revealed, it is Child Services' main priority and obligation to remove those children for their safety.
It's a publicly humiliating and troubling situation for Scott Rogers.
He was very distraught.
Scott Rogers gets Maria Edwards, his lieutenant at the church, to do a conference call with some of the parishioners and tell them it's all a big misunderstanding, that this has to do with him checking the wrong box on a form with the federal government. They were all horrified and very supportive of him at that time.
What Scott and his parishioners don't realise is that Rana Gray is the person responsible for the children being removed from his custody. And it all started with her letter in a Baton Rouge newspaper.
That letter to the editor changed life for everyone involved in this story.
When she wrote this letter to the editor that included Scott Rogers' name in it, and that started this whole chain of events.
A young man living in the UK who had been looking for Scott Rogers for 13 years found my letter to the editor online.
The mysterious young man sends Rana an email. He says he was a former student of Scott's art school in the UK.
I was so shocked at what the email said.
The real story why Scott Rogers emigrated from the UK to the United States.
I don't think anybody had a clue about his past.
There was deception and lies. He fed people a lot of BS.
Shocked by the troubling truth of Scott Rogers, Rana Gray spends the next 10 months putting together the puzzling pieces of his past.
She took it and ran with it. And for someone who had no investigative background, no law enforcement background, Ronna Gray just did a tremendous job.
We had 5 or so federal agencies involved. We had 2 U.S. attorneys' offices, Homeland Security, ICE, there were immigration people involved, U.S. Postal Inspection agents.
But little does anyone know that the federal investigation into Scott Rogers will uncover something else startling about him. He didn't just lie on the children's adoption papers.
Apparently, he had lied on some immigration forms he had filled out when he come to the States.
It's a felony offense.
Federal agents felt they had enough to take this before a federal grand jury.
The screws tighten on Scott even further when Kimberly, Stuart and Matthew receive subpoenas to testify in his fraud case.
So this is just building more and more frustration for Scott Rogers. If it comes to light that the applications to get into the United States were fraudulent, well, guess what happens? You're deported back to the UK.
He was scared to death. And that's when everything started going downhill for Scott.
He was worried that the government was coming to get him. It was basically driving him crazy. Scott believed that the government was watching him and monitoring him, and he believed that they could tap in and listen to any conversations through cell phones. So he wouldn't allow guests at the house to bring cell phones into the house. He had to turn them off and leave them on a little table in the entryway to the house.
Scott also fears that the security cameras inside his home may be compromised.
Scott believed that they could possibly tap in and view his cameras. They were all turned and pointed up to the ceiling where they couldn't catch any footage in the house.
Not knowing who to trust or what other secrets and lies could get exposed, Scott Rogers attempts to escape his troubles.
He was very emotional. He was mixing painkillers with alcohol.
And his downward spiral continues out of the house.
I remember thinking, I wonder where he gets his money. I can't imagine this show generates much income. There's got to be some other revenue stream coming in.
He was considered somewhat of a high roller at the casino in Baton Rouge, and he was seen there almost every night.
And he wasn't winning. He was losing.
So he had debt. And some people who develop a gambling problem, I'm told, keep thinking they're going to hit the big payday and it's going to be worth it.
Scott's family doesn't know what to do.
They're seeing him spiraling out of control. They're just thinking, oh my God, he's going through so much.
I can't imagine how upsetting it was for them.
In the days leading up to the grand jury convening to hear witnesses, Scott had arranged something of a family dinner at the house. Scott was struggling with everything that was going on, and he thought that he was feeling like the end was near.
Fortunately, Scott's friend and co-pastor is there to offer support.
I think he knew they were about to deport him or he was going to go to jail.
The stress affects the whole family. But the show must go on, and Stuart is happy to get away to do some work at the studio.
One evening, Stuart was at the studio in Baton Rouge.
Stuart ends up closing up. He goes to take the garbage out.
From what I understand, he walked out toward the dumpster.
Then Stuart is seen getting into a black vehicle.
And nobody had seen or heard from him since then.
Maybe he's been kidnapped.
He has disappeared.
Scott and his family are in turmoil, deeply troubled by the mysterious disappearance of Stuart, who may have secrets of his own.
Stuart was at the studio in Baton Rouge and he went to take the trash out, and he got into a car and left from the studio area. His family were concerned about his well-being because they hadn't seen or heard from him in a couple of days.
There's this fear something is wrong.
So what happened to Stuart? Scott has secrets and a growing list of enemies. Is it possible one of them was behind Stuart's disappearance? And who were the two men in the car?
We don't know.
And so there was a lot of confusion, I think, among everyone of what was going on.
Luckily, Scott is able to obtain the surveillance footage of the outside trash area.
So this is actually all caught on video. Stuart goes to take the garbage out and walks to this black vehicle with two people.
It's scary.
They are possibly assuming he's been kidnapped or he's been picked up by officials to be questioned about Scott Rogers.
There was a level of paranoia, especially on Scott's part.
He went into a total panic about it. Stuart's missing. They took the children and now he's disappeared.
I can't imagine how that must have made that congregation feel.
They came together. They had his back.
With Scott in deep crisis, Matthew contacts WAFB-TV, the station that airs around town, and tells them the show is cancelled due to a family catastrophe. And Maria goes to Scott's home to support the family in their time of need.
Maria had been staying with Scott Rogers, doing her part to just whatever she can do to be there for a friend, for her co-pastor.
Maria was very concerned about the well-being of Scott.
He hadn't slept in 2 or 3 days.
Scott is not only despondent about the missing Stuart, the grand jury into his immigration status is looming.
The federal government was going to have him deported for the false information he put on his immigration paperwork.
I can imagine he was scared to death.
He was a man who was used to having control over everything, and now his control was starting to unravel and be lost.
His world was crumbling.
It's early in the morning before the grand jury hearing for Scott Rogers, and Scott and Matthew have been up all night. Around 5 a.m, Maria is awakened by voices downstairs.
Scott and Matt had stayed up all night and weren't sleeping.
They're roaming the house, agitated.
She has no idea what's going on.
She saw Scott and Matthew prepare a number of documents.
Scott Rogers looks at Maria with a soul-searching gaze and passes her some documents and envelopes, then brushes past her to bed.
He believed that he was going to be deported after the grand jury convened.
He started talking to her about how scared he was. I believe Scott even asked her to say prayers over him.
Scott and Matthew are exhausted and distraught as the long night turns to morning. Hours later, what everyone has been dreading has arrived. It's time to leave for the grand jury.
Scott's daughter, Kimmy, had been called before the federal grand jury. Matthew had been called, and Stuart had been called.
But with the family in serious turmoil, Matthew decides he's not going to testify.
Kimmy was leaving to go to the grand jury. He said, "I'm not going." He was staying there with Scott at the house.
There is that fear deep inside that everything is about to come to light.
Across town, with Stuart still unaccounted for and Matthew a no-show, Kimberly does her duty and prepares to testify.
Kimmy was at the federal courthouse in Baton Rouge to testify in front of the grand jury into the inquiry into Scott Rogers.
None of the proceedings, to my knowledge, actually got underway.
Back at the house, Maria Edwards nervously stands by the front door, looking out the window, fearing the immigration authorities will storm the property at any moment.
Maria was very distraught and was very concerned about Scott.
The world around Scott Rogers is in deadly crisis as shocking secrets blast to the surface. Just before 1 p.m. on the first day of Scott Rogers' grand jury hearing, the tranquility of this quiet family neighbourhood is shattered by 2 loud blasts.
911, what's the emergency?
The Iberville Parish Sheriff's Office receives a distressing 911 phone call from a woman at Scott's residence.
I just heard another noise. Oh my God.
She was very distraught and upset.
The caller identifies herself as Maria Edwards.
Ma'am? Two guns, something. I just heard 2 noises. Can you please send somebody over very quickly, please? A gun? What happened?
She had heard some loud pops that she believed to be gunshots.
She was frantic.
Can you please send somebody over very quickly, please?
And she says, just get here. Just hurry up and get here right now.
Oh my God.
And so they dispatched Iberville Parish Sheriff's Office to the scene.
When we arrived on the scene, we were met by Maria Edwards. Maria was very distraught.
Also on the scene are investigators Laurie Morgan and Ronnie Hebert.
We had to find out what was going on.
We made our way up the stairs. We proceeded to the door and opened the door to the bedroom.
Inside, they make a grisly discovery.
We saw Scott Rogers laying in the bed with a large amount of blood.
He had 1 single gunshot wound to the forehead.
It looked like he was just shot right where he laid.
Everybody was, like, oh my God, who would do that to Scott Rogers?
And as we got more into the room, we could see some feet on the other side of the bed.
The other victim is soon identified as Matthew, one of the residents of the house.
We observed a gun laying on the floor next to Matthew, as well as what appeared to be a gunshot wound to his head.
But Matthew still has vital signs.
So they called EMS immediately, and he was airlifted to a nearby hospital.
If Matthew survived, eventually Matthew may open up and talk about what all happened.
Unfortunately, Matthew never makes it off life support and dies from the gunshot injury, leaving detectives to solve the mystery.
And then as the scene unfolds, as you're in there photographing and finding evidence, the first thing we assumed was that it was murder-suicide.
But nobody knew what had happened. It was too premature to make a call.
It was just a bizarre crime scene. It really was.
Local news outlets hear about Scott and Matthew's deaths and are now at the scene.
That was an instant story. This was a hot topic.
I was a reporter in Baton Rouge at that time. We're all working our sources. We're trying to find out a little more detail.
Word has also reached Scott's parishioners.
There was maybe 10 to 20 people out there on the street in front of the residence during the investigation, visibly upset and crying and shocked about what had happened.
While all of this is unfolding, authorities inform Kimberly of the tragedy.
She was in court in Baton Rouge at the time.
When they got word that there'd been a shooting at the house.
Kimberly is devastated. So the grand jury is adjourned just as new startling facts about her deceased father were about to be made public.
We learned that Scott Rogers had actually changed his name about 5 times over the course of his life.
His real name is actually Richard Scott Rogers.
And when filling out his immigration paperwork, Scott Rogers used variations of his name and did not disclose information about the previous case that he had been charged with while in the UK.
And what he was charged with shocks investigators.
Scott Rogers, as it turned out, was a child molester.
Scott Rogers had been accused of sexually abusing a young boy when he was running the Performing Arts Academy in Bury St. Edmunds. And he wasn't the only one who was sexually abused.
It turns out Ethan was one of them, and now as an adult, after hunting Scott for years, he shared his story with Rana.
He mentioned in the email that there'd been a court case involving one of the young boys abused by Scott. The tabloids were just going crazy with this story.
But during the trial, it was the boy's word against one of the most respected people in the community.
It's almost no surprise that the trial ended in a hung jury.
He was acquitted of them charges.
But the negative publicity generated by the trial severely damaged Scott's reputation. His wife soon divorced him, enrolment in his arts academy dropped, and so Richard Scott Rogers fled to the US to start a new life under his new name.
So in his head, nobody's going to find him. He has escaped his deep, dark secrets.
So he came here determined to not get caught again.
Investigators wonder, was Scott's shameful secret somehow related to his and Matthew's deaths?
Nobody knew what had happened. We had to find out what was going on, put that puzzle together, and then we'll make a determination as to what we think happened.
At the crime scene, they find some disturbing evidence. Several blood-stained notes.
It appeared that they were suicide notes written by Matthew.
And others containing instructions for Maria Edwards.
All kind of account and personal information.
There were also very explicit directions on how to sell off businesses and how to handle the finances.
It seemed like everything was being left with Maria in charge.
We found some wills that were written by Scott Rogers.
And they name Maria Edwards as the sole beneficiary.
It was shocking.
It appears she benefited greatly from the deaths of Scott and Matthew.
It was very concerning that she was in the house at the time it happened and that he had changed his wills, leaving everything to her. Scott had his security systems in the house, and it was very suspicious to us that the cameras were turned up to where they could not film any activities in the house.
The police want Maria to answer some serious questions, but she isn't cooperating.
And she didn't want to talk to them without a lawyer.
So why would you need an attorney?
Maria's behavior was very abnormal. So we felt that there might have been a little bit more going on there that she wasn't telling us.
Detectives wonder if Maria Edwards may have information about Scott Rogers and Matthew's mysterious deaths.
We learned that Miss Maria seemed like she was going to benefit from this.
He left all his fortune to her. He left everything to Maria, yet he left nothing for his own daughter, his own biological daughter.
So, to me, she was a suspect.
But at that time, we still had no evidence to link Maria into being involved in what happened upstairs.
She continued to say, I need my attorney present. And finally, about 9 days after the shooting, she arranges to go in with her lawyer and do her interview.
It's Chris Alexander, who is apparently the attorney for Miss Maria Edwards. She was very nervous.
Maria did deny any knowledge of knowing that Scott had ever molested any children.
All I saw from him was doing good, doing good, doing good.
She got fooled by Scott Rogers. She got duped just like everybody else. Could you tell us what transpired that day?
She gave us a little bit of background on how Scott had been distraught about everything going on in his life.
He was desperate, he was crying.
Maria says after Kimmy left for court, Matthew and Scott went upstairs to Scott's bedroom.
I stayed downstairs. And then now I'm waiting to hear from Kimmy about the court, what's happening in the jury. At the same time, I'm looking at all the cars because every noise, a truck or a car or something, well, they're going to come and pick them up. They're going to take them. And as I was doing that downstairs, I heard a shot. And I was freaked out. And I heard a second detonation.
Did Matthew or Scott tell you that I'm going to shoot myself, or Matthew's going to shoot me, or anything like that? Never discussed?
Never discussed. Never in my wildest dreams.
We truly believe that she was downstairs when it happened.
But they need to be certain.
She will submit to the DNA?
Yes, and I already told her about that.
Okay.
And I appreciate y'all doing it at the end of the interview.
Your DNA will be compared to the DNA on the weapon.
And the results clear Maria of any suspicion of wrongdoing.
Matthew was the only one that fired the gun. Maria was definitely downstairs at the time of the shooting.
It was a murder-suicide. His own son-in-law shot and killed him before he killed himself.
In the end, he was too cowardly to just take his own life.
Investigators soon learn that's the reason why Stuart disappeared.
Originally, Scott had talked to him about killing him and then killing himself.
Stuart wanted no part of that, and so he wanted to get out. So he arranged an escape, essentially.
He reached out to a federal agent, and then, from what I understand, 2 federal agents arrived the next day. They put him in their unit and took off with him to put him in protection.
Stuart agrees to be interviewed by Iberville Parish investigators, where he will eventually expose even more shocking secrets about Scott Rogers.
I've been through a lot of interviews, but that was probably one of the most interesting and heartbreaking interviews I've ever been a part of.
I met Scott Rogers when I was 12 years old. My parents met Scott with me, and Scott extended me a full scholarship at his performing arts school. By the time I was 13, he was engaging in sexual abuse with me as a kid. There were at least 3 other kids that I know of.
One of them was Matthew.
That, to me, is mind-blowing.
He basically manipulated Matthew and Stuart to live with him.
The truth is, if when I was like 17, you could have come down with an army and I wouldn't have left that man.
He basically brainwashed these kids into coming to the United States with him.
And Kimmy had actually married Matthew at Scott's request to help with the citizenship process.
It was a cover marriage to get him into the States legally.
But Scott's dark past would eventually catch up with him. And this time, he's unable to escape it.
He had built such a public persona of respectability, and he knew that was over, and that he was going to be exposed for what he really was, and I guess his ego just couldn't stand to go on like that.
So he chose to take the easy way out.
And unfortunately, Matthew's been brainwashed for 23 years, so he does. He shoots him first, and then he turns the gun on himself and shoots himself in the head.
I don't shed any tears over Scott Rogers' demise, and I don't think a lot of people do.
There's no telling how many victims Scott Rogers would have left in his wake had this not come to light.
And it all started with Ronna Gray's letter.
I still get emotional recounting this whole saga. This little letter to the editor changed everything. I don't know that Scott Rogers would have ever been exposed for what he really was.
This makes me realize that a lot of people do have secrets and hide things, and you don't always know their true ways.
I was a police officer for 32 years, and I learned, as every police officer does, that there's evil in the world. What's hard to accept, though, is that they don't look like monsters. They don't wear a name tag or a shirt that says, I'm dangerous, I'm evil, I'm a child molester. The ones that are the most dangerous are the ones that you trust.
Good friend of the show is Colonel Michael Edmondson.
I don't ever want to meet another Scott Rogers. I don't ever want to investigate another crime like this.
And I pray that all of his victims, be it people in the UK or be it here, they have the strength to move forward.